Most of us like democracy. Most of us think that aristocracy is different than democracy, or maybe even contradictory to it. And yet I'm going to try to prove that the two are not contradictory but complementary. In fact, that democracy depends on aristocracy. I don't mean by democracy and aristocracy simply two different modes of government, whether sovereignty rests in the many or the few. Those are, of course, alternatives. That's an either-or. I mean by democracy equality in any field, egalitarianism. And I mean by aristocracy the opposite, namely inequality. The fundamental relationship between any two persons, institutions, entities, or maybe even ideas in democracy is A equals B. The fundamental relationship in aristocracy is A is superior to B. So the idea of superiority and inferiority is the idea that typifies aristocracy. We don't like those words. The emotional connotation we immediately get from superior and inferior is very negative. And the emotional connotation that we immediately get from the idea of equality is affirmative. But I'm going to try to argue with the aid of C.S. Lewis that the two are not contradictory but complementary, and in fact that in every field, except maybe mathematics, where the equal sign means an equation and simply excludes an unequal sign, in every other field, the foundation for democracy is some sort of aristocracy. I'd like to start by reflecting on a little essay by C.S. Lewis called Democratic Education. In this essay, Lewis attacks the view that most people have today, namely that equality is natural and inequality is unnatural. Rousseau expressed this very famously in the line, "Man is born free and everywhere he is in chains." Marx expressed it also by saying the key to all of history is that all historical relationships of the past have been between oppressors and oppressed, winners and losers, those who hold the chains and those who are jerked at the other end of the chain. Lewis does not agree with that. He does not believe that inequality is unnatural but natural. And he does not believe that most forms of equality are natural. He believes that they are unnatural. And therefore, he believes that democracy depends upon and cannot survive without its opposite, inequality, as its foundation. Now, the essence of democracy and its distinctive point is, of course, some form of equality. Equal rights, especially equal rights before the law. Equal opportunities as much as possible. Equal sovereignty for each individual in the public arena, one man, one vote. And therefore, and this maybe is the very best thing about democracy, equal responsibility for your sovereignty. In a democracy, you can't say, oh, I'm only a peasant and he's the king. There is no king. Each individual is the king. So in a democracy, it's required that each individual do and think and live his or her very, very best. Just as a monarchy depends absolutely upon the monarch to be the best possible monarch, so in a democracy, there's an absolute dependence upon each citizen being the very best possible citizen. But are we really equal, or is equality a legal fiction? Well, if we're really equal, how? How are we equal? Am I equal to Manny Ramirez or Jonathan Papelbon? No. If I were, I wouldn't be here. Are you equal to me? Well, no. You're students and I'm a teacher, not vice versa. I'll come to you for advice about running this strange machine or balancing my checkbook or something like that, but you'll come to me for advice about giving a lecture to a class. There's only one thing that we seem to be equal in. We're not even equal as men and women. Men are absolutely superior to women at being men. And women are absolutely superior to men at being women. We're lousy women, and you're lousy men. So we're not equal in anything except our essence. We're all equally human. Now, if you're a nominalist and you don't believe there are universal essences, then we're not equal in anything. Well, if this is true, if we really are different in every specifiable way except our very essence, then to ignore that fact, if it's a fact, is as fatal as ignoring any other fact. That's as fatal as ignoring the fact that there's another car in the lane, and if you change lanes, you're going to crack up. That's as fatal as ignoring the fact that a match ignites a wilderness. Oh, I'll drop the match, and you know, I'm a New Ager. I create my own reality. It's safe. Facts are facts. So if this is a fact, it's going to have consequences. And it's certainly going to have consequences in politics, including a politics of democracy. Democracy is a form of politics. It's not an exemption from the universal laws of it. Well, if some kind of superiority and inferiority, or inequality, is natural and pervasive everywhere, including politics, then even if democracy is the best form of government, it must depend upon that natural fact of aristocracy. Now, in this essay, Democratic Education, Lewis is not primarily concerned with politics. He's primarily concerned with education. Lewis knew education better than he knew politics. He loved education better than he loved politics, and he was very good at education, much better than he was at politics. In fact, he never even read daily newspapers. He scorned politics. He ignored politics. His personal predilection were, forget it, it's not my thing. But education is so similar to politics that what he says in this essay about education applies for the most part to politics too. So I will first summarize the essay's main point, and then I'll try to apply it to politics. He starts the essay by quoting a very famous saying in Aristotle's Politics. Quote, "Democratic education does not mean the education Democrats like, but the education which will preserve democracy." So Aristotle is contrasting the education that Democrats like with the education that will preserve a democracy. The two are not the same. In fact, they're opposite. Because the education that Democrats tend to like is egalitarian, whereas the education that will preserve democracy is aristocratic. An extreme example of the education that Democrats like is a proposal, which fortunately never got off the ground, during the Clinton administration. Bill and Hillary both were behind this, called outcome-based education. Now, I don't know that much about it firsthand, but everybody that knows anything about it has told me exactly the same thing. And I simply can't believe what I'm hearing. Outcome-based education means that in a classroom, the smartest student is not allowed to go any faster than the slowest student. So the class has to go at the pace of the slowest student. So the whole class is responsible for bringing the slowest student up to the level of the class, and only then can it go on to something else. So the outcome that is determinative of education is an absolutely egalitarian outcome. Everybody has to pass before anybody can get another lesson. Now that's, of course, absurd. That simply doesn't work. And whoever squelched the program, Congress, I suppose, or a committee, realized that, had enough common sense. One of the best things about a democracy, by the way, is that since common sense is to be found more in ordinary people than in an elite or rulers, it usually works better.